Howdy neighbors, and welcome today to Cedar Creek Homestead here in the beautiful hills of Oklahoma. And rolling hills, I guess you might say, here in Oklahoma. And we sure appreciate you joining us today for another episode of Porch Talk. And today's subject is we're going to talk about global food shortage. There is a worldwide food shortage happening, and we're going to discuss that a little bit today. Before we get started though into today's video, I just want to talk to you for just a minute here that if you are not a subscriber, we would love to have you, and it would help us if you'd subscribe to our channel. After you hit the subscribe button, if you click that little bell that comes up, you'll be notified when we upload videos. Also, if you have a comment, if you got a comment, something about food shortages today, we'd love to hear from you. I always love reading your comments. It's I really enjoy that. And I want to say something too. I want to say a big thank you to all of our subscribers. And you have been so loyal and have stood behind us. And those of you who have, I certainly appreciate you. And I just want to say a big thank you and let you know how much we appreciate and let you know how much you mean to us. Anyway, as we get into the subject today of a global food shortage, in case you're not aware, there is worldwide food shortages. And just recently, if you've been following the news much, China has put out a government propaganda piece asking their people to eat everything on their plates. There is a food shortage going on in China. You might say, well, I'm not too concerned about China, but I don't want anyone to go hungry, and I am concerned about it. But also, when people get hungry, they're going to come out fighting. We've been very concerned the possibility of war with China. These trade things that Trump has done, charging tariffs to China, has definitely hurt China's income. It's one reason why China has released the China virus on us, and has caused our country to go into collapse as it has. In fact, it's been a miracle, praise the Lord, that we have come out of it as well and has survived as much as we have so far. But we're not over this thing yet. The virus, whether it was over or not, we have a long way of recovery ahead financially and getting our country back, and in many different ways we have a long road to recovery. But as of yet, the virus is still forefront in the news. It's forefront in people's minds. There's still people dying from it. So we're in a very rough time right now. But China has started telling their people that they need to eat everything on their plate. And I believe it's a group of 10 or more. If they go out to eat, they can only order 9 meals. If you can imagine that, that's very crazy. But they're telling their people this. They have food programs over there where people eat large portions of food. There's weird stuff that people watch on different things, different shows we have here in America. And they have their shows over there, and there's shows where they eat a whole lot, like a little skinny lady will eat a whole bunch of food, and people love to watch that. The government is banning that. They don't want people doing that because they don't have enough food to feed everybody. If that was their choice, that if everybody said, well, we're going to eat big like that skinny person does, there's just not enough food there to take care of them. Also, you may have found this just recently, that North Korea, and I realize that they're a communist nation, socialist communist type nation, which is what a large portion of our country wants to go to. So you can see what we have to look forward to in the coming years. But they are asking people to turn in their pets, and I thought about these animal rights people. I'm sure are just having a fit thinking about that they're going to turn in their dogs and cats so they could be turned into food to feed the people there. One thing in a government-ran society, the government officials, much like what happens already in America, but the government officials, they fare pretty well. They eat the best food, they draw the best wages, they get the best health care, and the subjects, like the rest of us are, we get what's left over there. And in North Korea, you can see that their only fat person in the country is their leader. And so, if that's what a lot of folks are wanting, just to throw that in, a lot of folks are wanting that here in America. But that is exactly, you cannot have communism or socialism, as some call it democratic socialism here in America. But the only way it'll ever work is the government has to have control. And 100% control, like Hitler took control of Germany, was socialism. One of the ways that control people is through food scarcities. There's been great leaders before that you've probably heard quotes of different ones. Kissinger said once that if you wanted to control a population, control their food. We know that Stalin, he starved out one group of his country that he didn't like. He just quit allowing food to go there. It's happened around many times throughout history and around the world that people have starved out, and it was because of the political leadership. And that's what we are headed to here in America. But one of the things I wanted to share with today, a lot of times we don't think here in the United States that stuff like that could actually happen, because we seem to continue to recover. We'll have the worst hurricane hit. We'll have the worst flooding. We'll have the worst fires. We'll have the worst tornadoes that's ever been recorded in history. And yet we seem to come through, and after a few weeks we forget all about it, and we go on, and we're just don't even worry about it. Everything's just back to normal. And that has been because of the grace of God. We've seen that Cuomo, the governor of New York, he come out and was given a speech and said that their recovery over the coronavirus had nothing to do with God. It was what the government did. And that's what a lot of our politicians get high and mighty. We see that through our politicians that say, oh, I'm only going to serve 2 terms and I'm out. I think they need term limits for sure, but they'll say that. Then when they come after they've done their 2 terms, they're so entrenched in there and enjoying it, they want to stay. But government leaders sometimes begin to think they are God or that they're above God, and we know that they're not. And we know that God keeps His people, but we have to make sure where we keep our allegiance, and that always needs to be to God and trusting in Him. But here in our country, just a few days ago, this land hurricane come through up north in Iowa through there, and they say over 10 million acres of corn and soybeans. And I would assume that the soybeans weren't hurt as bad as the corn was. Corn, when it's up and tasseling and it gets to a certain size and up pretty high, if you've ever grown corn, you get a big high windstorm, it'll just lay your corn right over. And we see, if you've seen any of the videos up there, I know a farm reporter guy that is supposed to have been up in the area this week, and he's going to come back and give us a good update on what's going on. But supposedly 10 million acres. I was like, I didn't even know they grew 10 million acres total of corn in the United States, but I guess we do, and much more than that. But the thought that I had was that corn is in everything. It's in, corn syrup. They make ethanol out of it. Cattle feed, chicken feed, hog feed, everything has a corn basis, and soybeans as well, besides the fact that we feed the world. Our food, sometimes when I think of the food system, I think is a little bit silly, because we seem like we import food from everywhere, but yet we export. And it looks like sometimes we would keep our food first and feed our country before we exported food out. But it's all a money game, and it's all due to investors and profit sharing and stockholders and such like as that. But we think food shortages cannot come to America. If they did, it would be very brief. We've already seen where the meat shelves have sold out. And I know it's not just something that happened here in Oklahoma, because I've had many of you send me emails or commented on the videos and said that you were experiencing the same thing. It's been on the news, all of the news broadcast. It's been in the magazines. It's just been everywhere. Now people are trying to buy freezers. The freezers are sold out. Refrigerators are sold out. Trying to get a beef in to even get it butchered at a processing facility is very, very hard. My processor's booked up until next year, until I think it's maybe June of 2021. So we see that we're in some tight times right now. Now there's a good possibility that we will just come through this with flying colors. By this time next year, we will have forgot all about it. The storm will be over. Everything will be fine. But one of these days, I believe we're going to come through a storm of some sort, whether it's a land hurricane or a virus or whatever it is. And we are not going to recover as easy as we have been recovering. And it's going to catch folks unaware and unprepared. And one thing that I mentioned on one of our videos video that I made, the last Porch Talk, that I believed I was not worried about gold and silver. And a lot of folks have argued about that and says, not that they're wanting to cause trouble or fuss over it. Some are just giving their opinion, but some I felt kind of wanted to argue a little bit about that. You can't eat gold and silver. Now, having some is perfectly fine. I have a little piece of gold that a friend of mine used to own a gold mine. And if I could find the story sometime, he wrote a story about what had happened through his gold mine adventure. And it was very, very interesting. They really had a great thing going for a while. But you have to excuse me, my allergies are bothering me. We're kind of getting dry and dusty here again, and they say the ragweed is very high, so I'm having trouble. But anyway, this friend of mine had a gold mine, and he brought me a little piece of gold one time and put it in a little special box for me and as a gift. And so I do have a little bit of gold. I don't know what it would actually buy, if it's even enough to buy a cup of coffee. I don't know. But what I've seen in the past, and some say, well, throughout history, they've always needed gold and silver. And some were quoting the Bible about Joseph. Well, when you read that story, they just prepared food. They didn't worry about prepping back gold and silver, because they ended up taking the gold and silver, all the money, everything everybody had. The government ended up getting it because people were buying their food from the government. That's why we need to prepare for ourselves. Instead of having to sell out to the government and perhaps have to receive the mark of the beast to get food, if we know how to raise our own food and have our own food, would definitely make a big difference. But knowing something is a good possibility of happening, such as they were already in a food shortages. When you go to the stores, and it's being reported all over, a lot of the stuff is sold out. Some say it's because more people are staying home and not eating in the restaurants, so they need more food to cook at home, so that's causing a shortage at the stores. A lot of people around here are preparing. A lot of people. I went to a little elderly widow woman's house the other day, and she told me she is concerned and how that she is preparing food back. And she had a bunch of canned goods and stuff on the counter there, and she said, all of this is stuff that I'm going to put back. She said, I'm afraid this winter they might run out of food. And I was like, she's doing rightfully so, a little bit at a time as she goes and buys groceries. But you may say, Howie, what can I do to do better with my food? What could I do? How could I manage? It's too late now to grow a garden. I know there's always people saying, oh, well, you can plant this and you can plant that. If you've never gardened, trying to grow a garden now this fall is a little late. It's in August here. Our growing season, the best growing season, is pretty well over. You can still plant some turnips. You can still plant some fall peas, a few things like that. You could probably plant, of course you could plant turnips, but beets, garlic. But if you haven't gardened and you're not prepared and you don't have a garden spot going, you're pretty well over with for this season. I would start preparing for next year. If I was going to do raised beds, I'd start building those raised beds. It takes time. If I start getting preparations throughout now till next spring, start making plans, get me some lists of what's going on. If I wanted to raise food and start a garden, I'd start working on the plans now and not wait till the last minute next year. I'd start getting my seeds prepared. And as you know, if you try to garden or do anything, anyone knows anything about gardening, you know, there's a guy running for president on the Democrat side, and he, I can't think of his name right now, but he said, he's a publisher guy or whatever, but he says, I was trying to think of the name. His name, anyway, don't matter. That part isn't important. But he's made a statement that he could teach anybody to farm. I'm telling you, not everybody can farm. You've got to know what you're doing. If you're going to farm big time, like these big crop people do, I mean, you've got a bunch of money tied up in crops. You've got to know all the ins and outs. I mean, you don't just jump out there and just say, oh, I'm going to buy 1,000 acres and grow 1,000 acres of corn and think you're going to succeed. It takes some time to get prepared. But starting now, start getting preparations. Start watching videos. Start getting ready. Before you know it, spring of 2021 will be here, and it'll be time to plant. It'll be time to get ready. A lot of folks this year started gardening, and they seen the need, but then they got to a point where they needed canning jars to preserve the harvest that they grew, and they can't get the jars. I will tell you this, and I think I have shared this already on other videos. Around here, about once a week, they will have an estate auction within driving distance, within an hour of here. They will have an estate auction, and those almost always, there will be, especially if it's an older couple, there will be several boxes of canning jars. And up here, not far from us, and it's been a year or so ago or two, I went there to the auction. It was an estate auction, and they had a bunch of boxes of jars, and I got them for $1 a box. It was some of the jars that Josie said she didn't really need, but most of the boxes or jars, most of the jars were good jars that we could use. Some old antique jars that Josie was very tickled to get some of that old stuff. But we were able to get those for $1 a box. And people at the auction, nobody bid on them. I just said, I'll give you $1 a box, and he let me take all the boxes I wanted. Now, I'm sure that has changed now. If you go to an auction that has canning jars, you're going to see that it's a little bit different, I would assume, because we have people asking all the time, where can they get canning jars? Where can they get a pressure cooker? You're going to, and let me tell you, pressure cookers, canners, I call them, where you pressure cook your jars to can them. A pressure canner are sold out, but I've heard that they're supposed to be available in November. Well, go ahead and get your order in. Go ahead and you say, well, I won't have nothing to preserve in November. Get your things ready, and through the winter when it's slower times and people aren't buying as much, go ahead and start getting your supplies and things ready. But let's say you can't grow a garden. You don't have a place. Maybe you live in an apartment complex. Maybe you rent a home from somebody. A lot of people around here rent homes, and the landlord doesn't want the yard tore up because he's like, well, you tear the yard up and plant a garden, and eventually you're going to be gone, and I've got a tore up piece of ground, so I don't want you doing that. So you can't grow a garden. I'll tell you what, some of the folks are doing around here is going to farmers markets, and if they can, some stuff they're freezing. The worst thing is you get your freezer full and then you don't have anywhere else to put your stuff. If we lose electric and you have your freezer full, then all your food would ruin. But canning it, processing it, putting it in jars, quarts or pint-sized jars, and getting it put back is very something that you can really use and do yourself. use your time and your labor, especially if you're laid off from work and could do it. A lot of families, one or the other is laid off work, so maybe one of the spouses is still able to work, the other one isn't. Well, while they're at home not having anything much to do, besides just the regular chores and not having a regular job, they could work half the time it takes on a regular job and get a lot of food preserved. But if you can't do all that, you're not in a place where you can't get the jars, you can't do this, can't do that. There are so many other things you can do. You can go buy beans and rice. Now, to me, beans and rice would be your top two things. And we would eat more beans than what we would eat rice. But having yourself prepared, going and buying, as Sam's used to, it's been a few years back since we've done it, but we bought 50-pound bags of pinto beans. If you buy one bag of pinto beans, will last a long time. A 50-pound bag I'm talking about. Plus other things. There's all kinds of stuff you could do to prepare yourself for what's coming. Don't wait till the last minute and then be caught unaware. Extra things, some folks are panicking and going out and buying gobs of food, and maybe that is justified. Maybe you need to panic right now. Maybe folks really do need to get out there and really buy them some food and get things going. Maybe that is the case. But what I would say right now is buy a little bit each week, and that's what I get to report from comments on our videos, people I visit with on a daily basis. What they're doing is buying a little bit along, and they're taking and investing in it. You want to talk about gold and silver. When the Iron Curtain collapsed in Russia, the rich people that had lots of gold and silver or had lots of currency. One story I heard was a man went and bought groceries and used a whole wheelbarrow full of money. The money was worthless. Not only in Russia, I've heard it happen in other countries. Venezuela is an example of people that were pretty well off that do not have food to eat, and they're going in and bartering with people, but perhaps taking their fancy cars or whatever they have, jewelry and things, and trading it in. So having something to trade, yeah, that's important. But if you're already growing things, or you're already where you can get things to barter and use, I heard a story once in Russia where some people drove a very expensive, like a Rolls Royce, whatever type car it was, out into the country and traded that car for a sack of potatoes, is how bad things were. So your farmers and people were doing very well, but the rural people, now if it comes down to that, the way our government is anymore, it would not surprise me for them just to take over the food system and take over and make you turn in your food that you have stored back. That's all possibilities. But, and there's people who have remedies for that. One thing too, when times get rough, here we have lots of deer. We have wild hogs here. We have squirrels, rabbits, bobwhite quail, not a lot of quail, wild turkeys. Now, when I was a boy growing up, we lived off of deer meat. We ate a lot of deer. We raised our own hogs. We rarely ever had a beef, but we ate lots of pork. We fed the hogs our scraps and shorts. If you've ever fed shorts, it was my job to take the scraps and put them in a bucket and mix them up with shorts, and it's wheat, something left over from wheat, and put water in it, and you would mix it up and feed it to the hogs, and we called it slopping the hogs, and that was one of my jobs. But we hardly ever had beef, but we survived on that. And wild game, fish, some say, well, they would run out pretty quick. Well, back in those days, people around here lived off of the wild game, and we didn't have wild hogs at that time here. Now we have the wild or feral hogs, they're calling them. And but nonetheless, we were didn't have very many deer. If you seen a deer, it was kind of rare. When I first started hunting deer as a boy, it was just very seldom that you seen deer. In fact, they had a drawing to kill does, and everybody that hunted could send in for a doe tag, they called it. And so not only could you kill a buck, but you could also kill a doe. Well, my dad and uncles and relatives, they would send in, all the family members would send in as many as could to draw out for a doe tag. But you wouldn't use it because they felt like they wanted to build the deer herd up. Now here we have an abundance amount of deer. Not as many deer hunters, not as many people that care. What few do hunt are usually hunting more for the antlers, although they utilize the deer and they eat the meat. And we even have places here that you can donate the deer to. If you don't want to eat it and you won't really care about that, but you want to have the antlers or the head so you can have it stuffed, but you don't really want to eat the deer meat, there's places here that will process them and they'll give it to the needy, which is a very good idea, a very good program. But here now we have so many deer that they're upping the harvest amounts each year. This year, I forget how many, I think you can kill 7 or 8 deer here total. Just a lot of deer because there are people's running over them with their cars, and they're also worried that they would become diseased if they get overpopulated. We've seen some problems here with rabies because the animals such as skunks and coons and possums and things like that have become so abundant that they're having problems with rabies here. Used to, people trapped them and they kept them thinned down, or farmers, people had chickens and things, and they would trap them because they was trying to get into their animals, or people would trap them for money. And since the animal rights people have had their way, now we see those animals getting sick and dying, a bunch of them, and they're getting overpopulated, and they're having issues with diseases that at one time had kind of died out or nearly become eradicated. So if you get too many deer, it's just like anything else. The disease in wild animals for sure will run rampant. So, but we have lots of those type of animals to eat on for a while. So those are some things you could do if things get bad. Most people wouldn't want to eat a deer anymore. And we usually make jerky out of our deer meat, and wouldn't bother me at all to eat deer steak, and a good old fried up deer steak. My mama, I'm telling you, she knew how to fix deer meat, and we had deer burgers, deer chili, you name it. And my grandfather, on my mom's side, stepmom's side anyway, he probably there's no telling how many deer that guy has butchered in his lifetime. And if we got to running low on meat, my dad would call him and say, "Hey, we're needing some meat," and he'd just go over and kill a deer. Now, if you're in town, maybe you could kill some of the squirrels or pigeons in town with a pellet gun, if they allow that in your community, but you may have trouble. So what do you do in that case, in that scenario? Well, there's always ways. You can preserve food, you can put food back, you can hide food under your bed. There are food packets like FoodWise makes, that's dehydrated food. There are a lot of alternatives, but getting creative and coming up with things to do. And so that when things do get bad, because if we become into a real food shortage, you've seen what these so-called protesters, they're saying they're protesting and it's their constitutional right, but they're not. They're rioting. They're destructive. They're anarchists. They are hurting people, burning down businesses, beating innocent people, innocent bystanders, shooting innocent children. The other day, I don't know if you've seen where this young boy had rode up in the guy's yard, and he just shoots the kid because he had rode up in their yard to turn around. We are in a vile situation, and if you think that is rough or bad, now if I don't care what you believe or think about it all, but it's bad. And if you think that's bad how they're acting and coming out, let me tell you, when they don't have food to eat and they have no idea what to do, when they get hungry, folks will get desperate. You get an old starving animal, he will get desperate, and they will get desperate, and they will come out of the woodwork. So being prepared not only with just food, but perhaps even a way to protect what is yours. and maybe having some kind of a plan, a benevolence plan in your deal. How are you going to help folks if they come for needs? I know a bunch of you on one of my videos I did a while back said, what are you going to do when people that should have been preparing aren't preparing? What are you going to do for them? How are you going to help them? And let me tell you, you need some kind of a plan to help other people, but you cannot give it all away. If they don't prepare and they don't do their thing, you can't afford to give it all away to people that did not try to help themselves. Right now, you could be telling other people, get in gear and start helping yourself. It's coming. Over and over, we hear experts that are telling. I don't consider myself an expert in this area here, but there are people that are experts that are saying. We had this Scott, it's one of the U.S. Senators a while back, or representative, whichever he is. He was asking questions of, I believe it was the Treasury Secretary, but he said, what are y'all going to do for the farmers? We know that there is a food shortage coming. It was right out of his mouth. So being prepared, our leaders know it, our congressmen and senators realize that some cities are even preparing food back, preparing for what they believe is going to be one of the worst food shortages in history. The United Nations has been talking about it. I don't have a lot of faith in them, but they have been talking about it and giving speeches at their headquarters in New York City, telling the world, you need to get ready. We need to be doing what we can to get prepared. If you get prepared and nothing ever happens, you can always eat the food you put back. No, it ain't nothing bad about that. You can eat the food. Now, don't buy stuff that ain't going to last. Don't go out and buy 100 loaves of bread and expect it to last without molding. It's not. It's going to ruin. Perhaps buy your bread as you need it and learn to bake your own bread, and buy wheat berries, and it's what we call the wheat seeds, is wheat berries, and grind them up and practice right now while you can. Practice making homemade breads and things like that. Learning some skills that you can do. Canning, butchering. One thing that we're looking at getting in here at our homestead is butchering and building a little facility here. It won't be a commercial facility or nothing like that, but an area that we could butcher our chickens and cattle and hogs, whatever, and butcher them for our own consumption, and perhaps even be able to help other people locally here that would maybe have a beef or a hog or whatever, and they want to, or maybe they kill a deer and need help, and they could come along and we could help them with the butchering skills. A lot of people have lost these skills. There's been some generations that have skipped a lot of good old skills, learning how to cure and smoke and process a hog. Around here, used to, the old timers, that's what they lived off of, was cured meat, cured pork. Because they didn't have refrigeration, that's what they lived off here. And it has not been that many years ago when people still lived off the land and survived here. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's food update, and hope you're doing well. I do appreciate you watching. May God richly bless you. We'll see you here next Tuesday for another episode of Porch Talk.